Michael Crawford runs his marketing department like his personal kingdom, where female employees learn to stay in their natural place or face the consequences. When a quiet new analyst named Sarah Martinez joins his team, he sees just another woman to mold to his will. Little does he know, she's been documenting his every move, and his perfectly constructed world of power and privilege is about to come crashing down. Sarah Chen adjusted her simple black blazer as she walked through the glass doors of Chen Industries' downtown office. At 28, she could have easily walked into the executive suite on the top floor, but that wasn't her style. After completing her MBA at Stanford, she had convinced her father, CEO James Chen, to let her learn the business from the ground up, anonymously. The best leaders understand every aspect of their company, she had told him over dinner at his favorite Chinese restaurant. I want to earn my place, Dad, not just be given it. Her father had initially resisted, but Sarah's determination won him over. They crafted a careful plan. She would apply under her mother's maiden name, Sarah Martinez, with a resume that highlighted her education and internship experience, but omitted any connection to the Chen family. Only HR's director knew her true identity, and she was sworn to secrecy. Today marked Sarah's first day as a junior marketing analyst, starting at the very bottom of the corporate ladder. She had deliberately chosen the marketing department because it was headed by Michael Crawford, a recent hire who had been making waves, and not necessarily good ones. The elevator dinged at the 15th floor, and Sarah stepped out into the bustling marketing department. The space was modern and open plan, with glass-walled conference rooms and clusters of desks separated by low dividers. She checked her phone's calendar app. She was supposed to meet her new supervisor in conference room C at 9 a.m. As she approached the room, she could hear a male voice speaking loudly through the glass. Michael Crawford was berating someone, his face flushed with anger. Sarah slowed her pace, watching as a young woman hurried out of the room, wiping her eyes. "Hey, are you okay?" Sarah caught up with the woman, who was clutching a stack of papers to her chest. "Oh, I'm fine," the woman smiled weakly. "I'm Jennifer. You must be the new analyst?" Sarah nodded, and Jennifer's expression turned sympathetic. "Word of advice? Triple-check everything before you show it to Mr. Crawford. He's particular." "Particular about what?" Sarah asked, though she had already heard the rumors about Crawford's management style. "Everything, but especially with the women in the department. The guys can get away with murder, but if any of us make even the tiniest mistake..." Jennifer shrugged. "Just be careful, okay?" Sarah thanked her and walked into conference room C, where Crawford was shuffling through papers on the table. He looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to something else as he gave her a slow once-over that made her skin crawl. "Sarah Martinez?" He extended his hand, holding on to hers a moment too long when she shook it. "Welcome to Chen Industries. I hope you're ready to prove yourself." Over the next few weeks, Sarah documented everything. Crawford's pattern was clear. He assigned women the most tedious tasks, criticized their work publicly while praising male employees for similar or lesser efforts, and made inappropriate comments just subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. She watched him shoot down Jennifer's excellent campaign proposal while enthusiastically endorsing a mediocre pitch from Todd, a recent male hire. She noticed how he scheduled mandatory early morning meetings that created childcare issues for the working mothers in the department. She observed his tendency to interrupt and talk over female employees during presentations. What Crawford didn't notice was how Sarah stayed late every evening, meticulously building files of evidence. She recorded dates, times, and witnesses. She collected emails and meeting notes. She spoke privately with other women in the department, gaining their trust and hearing their stories. Linda from graphic design confided about being passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of less qualified male colleagues. Maria from social media described how Crawford had suggested her accent might be too strong for client presentations. Rebecca from content writing revealed she'd been denied flexible working hours for her son's medical appointments, while male team members regularly worked from home. Sarah's own experiences mounted daily. Crawford nitpicked her reports while glossing over errors in those submitted by male analysts. He assigned her to take notes in meetings, despite it not being part of her job description. He made comments about her clothing choices and suggested that she should smile more. "You know, Martinez," he said one afternoon, leaning against her desk, "you've got potential, but you need to learn to play the game. Maybe we could discuss your career goals over dinner sometime." Sarah declined politely, maintaining her professional demeanor while her stomach churned. She added the interaction to her growing file. The situation came to a head during a major client presentation. Sarah had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive marketing strategy for a potential multi-million-dollar account. Her research was thorough, her analysis sound, and her recommendations innovative. She had even caught a serious flaw in the competitor analysis that could have embarrassed the company. The morning of the presentation, Crawford called her into his office. "Listen, Martinez, I've been thinking, this is a crucial account and we can't take any risks. I'm going to have Todd present your work instead." Sarah kept her voice steady. "May I ask why? I did all the research and preparation." Crawford's smile was condescending. "It's nothing personal. Todd just has a more executive presence. You understand, don't you? Besides, some of these old-school clients respond better to a male presenter. I'm doing you a favor, really. You can sit in and take notes." Sarah watched as Todd stumbled through her presentation, unable to answer basic questions about the research she had conducted. The client looked increasingly skeptical, and Sarah could see months of potential work slipping away. Crawford shot her warning looks every time she tried to speak up to clarify a point. By the end of the meeting, it was clear the client was unimpressed. As they filed out of the conference room, Sarah overheard one of them muttering about taking their business elsewhere. That evening, as Sarah compiled her notes on the day's events, Jennifer stopped by her desk. "I saw what happened in there," Jennifer said quietly. "It wasn't right. None of this is right." She hesitated, then added, "Some of us have been talking about filing a formal complaint, but we're scared. Crawford has friends in HR, and we can't afford to lose our jobs." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "What if I told you there might be another way?" The next day, Sarah began implementing the next phase of her plan. She volunteered for additional projects, making herself indispensable while carefully documenting every interaction. She noticed Crawford becoming bolder, perhaps mistaking her quiet competence for submission. She watched him take credit for her ideas in management meetings. She observed how he began calling her "sweetheart" in front of clients. She noted how he scheduled one-on-one meetings at increasingly odd hours. Other women in the department continued sharing their experiences with her, not realizing that each story was another piece of evidence in a larger puzzle. Sarah's file grew thicker, and her resolve strengthened. She knew timing would be crucial. Too soon, and she wouldn't have enough evidence. Too late, and more women might suffer under Crawford's leadership. The marketing department's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Crawford's behavior seemed to worsen as the pressure of several major campaigns mounted. He began making more overt comments, his subtle discriminatory practices becoming more blatant as his frustration grew. Sarah maintained her cover perfectly, playing the role of the hardworking junior analyst, while gathering intelligence like a seasoned operative. She knew Crawford viewed her as just another female employee he could manipulate and control. His blindness to her true identity was his greatest weakness, and Sarah was patient. She had learned from her father that timing in business, as in life, was everything. And so, she waited, documented, and planned, knowing that when the moment finally came, it would need to be perfect. The women of the marketing department were counting on her, even if they didn't know it yet. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah felt the pressure building like a gathering storm. Crawford's behavior was affecting department morale, and good people were starting to look for jobs elsewhere. Jennifer had confided that she was updating her resume, and Maria had already had an interview with a competing firm. Sarah knew she needed to maintain her cover for just a little longer. The evidence was overwhelming, but she wanted to be certain there could be no doubt about the systematic nature of Crawford's discrimination. Each day brought new incidents, new witnesses, new documentation to add to her growing case. She continued to excel at her work, despite Crawford's attempts to undermine her, knowing that her performance would be crucial to what was to come. The other women in the department began looking to her as an unofficial leader, someone who could weather Crawford's storms without breaking. What they didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just gathering evidence. She was building a case that would change everything. But for now, she remained Sarah Martinez, the quiet analyst who watched, waited, and documented every move that Michael Crawford made, knowing that his day of reckoning was approaching. As December approached, Crawford announced a mandatory department holiday party at an upscale restaurant downtown. Sarah noticed how he'd scheduled it for a Thursday evening, making it difficult for employees with families to attend. Yet he'd made it clear that absence would be noted. "Think of it as a team-building opportunity," he announced during a morning meeting, his gaze lingering on Sarah. "I expect everyone to be there. It's important to show commitment to the department." Jennifer caught up with Sarah at the coffee machine later. "He's getting worse," she whispered. "Did you see the email about the year-end performance reviews? He's scheduling all the women's reviews for after hours." Sarah had seen it. She'd also noticed how Crawford had begun taking more liberties, standing too close during conversations, finding excuses to touch shoulders or arms, making comments about weekend plans. The holiday party would undoubtedly provide him with more opportunities for inappropriate behavior. The evening of the party arrived cold and snowy. Sarah chose her outfit carefully, a conservative black pantsuit that wouldn't give Crawford any excuse for commentary. She arrived precisely on time to find the restaurant's private room already buzzing with nervous energy. Crawford had positioned himself near the entrance, greeting each arrival. When Sarah walked in, he immediately handed her a glass of wine. "You look different outside the office, Martinez. You should dress up more often." Sarah accepted the glass, but didn't drink from it. She watched as Crawford repeated the pattern, offering drinks to female employees while engaging male employees in conversations about business and promotions. She noticed how he'd arranged the seating to place himself at a table with the younger women from the department. Throughout dinner, Sarah observed Crawford becoming increasingly bold with his behavior. His comments grew more suggestive, his laughter louder. She saw how uncomfortable Jennifer looked, as Crawford repeatedly placed his hand on her shoulder while talking to others at the table. "Martinez," Crawford called out during dessert, his voice carrying across the room. "I've been meaning to discuss that proposal you submitted last week. Why don't you stop by my office tomorrow evening, say, around 7? Several people glanced at Sarah sympathetically. They all knew what Crawford's late-night meetings usually entailed. Hours of nitpicking and subtle intimidation, with an underlying current of inappropriate comments and suggestions. "Actually, Mr. Crawford," Sarah replied clearly, "I believe that proposal needs to be reviewed by tomorrow morning. Perhaps we could discuss it now?" Crawford's eyes narrowed slightly. "This isn't the time or place for business talk. Tomorrow evening will be fine." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Sarah noticed Maria and Rebecca exchange knowing looks. They'd both been through similar situations. But tonight, something felt different. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. As the evening wore on, Crawford began sharing stories about his successful management style, each anecdote more revealing than the last. The alcohol had loosened his tongue, and he seemed to have forgotten that several people were still sober, including Sarah, who was mentally recording every word. "You know," he announced to the table, "some people don't understand what it takes to succeed in this business. They think it's all about qualifications and hard work." He laughed dismissively. "But it's really about understanding your natural place in the hierarchy." Sarah caught Jennifer's eye across the table. They both knew he was just getting started. "Take Martinez here," Crawford continued, gesturing towards Sarah with his wine glass. "Smart girl, good education, but she needs to learn how to play the game. Women in this industry need to understand their role. It's just biology, really, right, Martinez?" The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Sarah could feel everyone watching, waiting to see how she would respond. She thought about her father, about all he had built, and about how Crawford was corrupting it all with his toxic leadership. "And what role would that be, Mr. Crawford?" Sarah asked, her voice steady and clear. Crawford smiled, not recognizing the danger in her tone. "Let's be honest. In this business, women are better suited to supportive positions. Leave the big decisions to those who are naturally equipped to handle them. It's just common sense." Sarah noticed several of her female colleagues stiffening in their seats. She saw the resignation in their eyes, the familiar look of women who had heard this kind of thing too many times before. But she also saw something else, a spark of anger, of defiance. The holiday party was becoming a powder keg, and Crawford was playing with matches. Sarah had planned to wait longer, to gather more evidence, but watching him now, watching him deliberately humiliate and demean her colleagues under the guise of celebration, she wondered if the time for waiting was over. She thought about the thick file of documentation in her desk drawer, about the recordings and emails and witness statements. She thought about Jennifer's lost promotion, about Maria's silenced voice, about Rebecca's denied flexibility. She thought about all the women who had left the department, and all those who felt trapped into staying. Crawford was still talking, still digging himself deeper with every word. He had no idea that his carefully constructed power structure was about to face its greatest challenge. He couldn't see that his behavior at this holiday party was providing the final pieces of evidence needed to bring everything crashing down. Sarah sat quietly, maintaining her composure as Crawford continued his monologue about natural order and traditional business values. She could feel the weight of her father's legacy and her own responsibility pressing on her shoulders. The moment of revelation was approaching, but timing would be crucial. As Crawford launched into another condescending anecdote about a former female employee who just couldn't handle the pressure, Sarah reached for her phone under the table. The recording app was already running, capturing every word. The next morning, Crawford's hangover didn't stop him from implementing his latest policy change. He announced that all female employees would need to submit their work for additional review before presenting to clients. Male employees, he explained, could continue with the standard approval process. "It's about maintaining our professional standards," he said during the morning meeting, pointedly avoiding eye contact with any of the women present. "We've had some emotional presentations lately that didn't reflect well on the department." Sarah watched as her colleagues slumped in their chairs, their faces showing varying degrees of frustration and resignation. She thought about the previous night's recording, safely backed up in multiple locations. Crawford had no idea he'd handed her exactly what she needed. Clear, undeniable evidence of his discriminatory policies, recorded in his own words. Later that afternoon, Crawford called Sarah into his office. The blinds were partially closed, and he gestured for her to sit in the chair directly beside his desk, rather than across from it. "Martinez," he began, his tone deceptively friendly. "I noticed you seemed uncomfortable at the party last night. I hope you didn't misunderstand anything I said about women in business. I'm actually your biggest advocate here." Sarah maintained her composed expression. "How so, Mr. Crawford?" "Well," he leaned closer, "I've been thinking about your position in the department. You have potential. With the right guidance, the right support, you could go far. Of course, that would require some additional one-on-one mentoring." Sarah noticed how he emphasized certain words, how his eyes lingered inappropriately. She also noticed the new email that had just popped up on his computer screen. A message from HR requesting a meeting about recent department complaints. Crawford quickly minimized it, but not before Sarah caught the subject line. "I appreciate the offer," Sarah replied carefully, "but I prefer to advance based on my work performance." Crawford's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "That's what I'm trying to tell you, Martinez. Your work performance isn't enough. You need to understand how things really work in this business. The holiday party was just a small example. There are certain expectations." As he spoke, Sarah could hear activity in the hallway outside. People were gathering for the afternoon client meeting, the one where Todd would once again be presenting Sarah's work. She thought about Jennifer, Maria, and Rebecca, about all the women who had suffered under Crawford's leadership. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Crawford?" Sarah asked, making sure her phone was still recording in her pocket. He smiled, clearly mistaking her question for interest. "I'm suggesting that you and I could have a special working relationship. I could protect you from the more demanding aspects of the job, guide your career in the right direction. All you need to do is be a little more cooperative." Sarah stood up slowly, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Are you implying that my professional advancement would depend on something other than my job performance?" Crawford's expression hardened. "I'm trying to help you, Martinez. Don't make the same mistake others have made. Ask Jennifer about what happens to employees who don't understand how to play the game." The threat was clear, and it was exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. She gathered her papers calmly, aware that Crawford was watching her every move, probably already planning how to make her work life miserable if she refused his mentoring. As she reached the door, Crawford called out, "Think carefully about our conversation, Martinez. Your year-end review is coming up. It would be a shame if your performance was found lacking." Sarah paused with her hand on the doorknob. Everything she had documented over the past months, every piece of evidence she had gathered, every story she had collected from other women in the department, it was all leading to this moment. Crawford had finally overplayed his hand. She thought about her father, about the company he had built, about the values he had instilled in her. She thought about all the women who had left promising careers because of men like Crawford, and all those who stayed, enduring daily harassment because they couldn't afford to leave. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across Crawford's desk. In the hallway, she could hear the client meeting beginning. Soon, Todd would stumble through another presentation of her work, while Crawford smiled and took credit for the department's success. Sarah turned slightly, watching Crawford's smug expression as he waited for her response. He was so certain of his power, so secure in his position, that he couldn't see what was coming. He had no idea that his carefully constructed hierarchy was about to crumble, or that the quiet analyst he'd been harassing was about to become his worst nightmare. That evening, while Crawford was busy mishandling the client presentation, Sarah made two important phone calls. The first was to her father, bringing him up to speed on everything she had documented over the past months. The second was to Chen Industries board secretary, requesting an emergency board meeting for the following morning. As she worked late into the night, preparing her presentation, Sarah received a series of text messages from Jennifer. "Crawford's on a rampage," the first one read. "Client presentation went terribly. He's blaming everyone but himself." Another message followed. "He's calling an early morning meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m., mandatory for all female team members. Says we need additional training on professional conduct." Sarah smiled grimly as she replied, "Don't worry, just make sure everyone attends." She spent the next few hours organizing her evidence methodically. The recording from Crawford's office joined dozens of others in a carefully labeled folder. Emails, performance reviews, witness statements, and documentation of systematic discrimination filled several more files. The pattern was undeniable, and Crawford had helpfully provided the final pieces himself. At 6:45 the next morning, Sarah walked into the office wearing one of her usual simple business suits. She noticed Crawford watching from his office as the female employees filed in, looking tired and apprehensive. He had positioned himself by the conference room door, greeting each woman with condescending comments about professional development and attitude adjustment. At precisely 7 a.m., as Crawford prepared to begin his meeting, the elevator doors opened. James Chen stepped out, accompanied by several board members and the company's legal team. Sarah watched Crawford's expression shift from confusion to concern as the executives filed past the conference room. "Mr. Crawford," James Chen's voice carried across the office, "your presence is required in the main boardroom, immediately." Crawford straightened his tie, trying to maintain his composure. "Mr. Chen, I'm actually in the middle of an important training session." "Now, Mr. Crawford?" The women in the conference room watched in confusion as Crawford followed the executives to the elevator. Sarah quietly gathered her materials and headed for the stairs. She had prepared for this moment meticulously, and she wasn't about to miss it because of elevator small talk. In the boardroom, Crawford was already seated, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more people filed in. The board members took their usual seats, while the legal team arranged documents at one end of the long table. James Chen remained standing, his expression unreadable. "Before we begin," Chen announced, "I'd like to introduce someone who has some serious concerns about the marketing department's management practices." Sarah walked in, carrying her files. Crawford's face showed only mild annoyance at the presence of a junior analyst at a board meeting. That expression quickly changed as Sarah took her place at the head of the table beside her father. "Good morning," she said clearly. "For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm James Chen's daughter, and for the past few months I've been working as a junior analyst in the marketing department, documenting a pattern of systematic discrimination and harassment under Michael Crawford's leadership." The color drained from Crawford's face as Sarah began her presentation. Hour after hour, she laid out her evidence methodically. Recordings played, documents were distributed, witness statements were read. Crawford's carefully constructed facade crumbled with each new piece of evidence. When she played the recording from his office, Crawford attempted to interrupt, claiming his comments were taken out of context. The board chairman silenced him with a sharp gesture. Sarah continued, her voice steady as she outlined how Crawford had created a hostile work environment, particularly for female employees. She presented statistics showing the departure rate of women from his department, the disparity in promotion rates, the systematic dismantling of talented professionals' careers. The morning stretched into afternoon as Sarah detailed every instance of discrimination, every inappropriate comment, every abuse of power. She had witness statements from current and former employees, documentation of retaliatory actions, and clear evidence of policy violations. Finally, Sarah played the recording from the holiday party, where Crawford had explicitly outlined his views on women in business, unaware that he was speaking to the owner's daughter. The boardroom was silent except for the sound of Crawford's own voice condemning himself. As the final recording ended, Sarah turned to face Crawford directly. For the first time, he saw her not as a subordinate to be manipulated, but as the formidable executive she truly was. The realization came too late. James Chen stood, his expression stern. "Mr. Crawford, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Crawford looked desperately around the room, searching for allies, but found none. This was not a situation he could charm or intimidate his way out of. The evidence was overwhelming, and his power base had evaporated. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had one more card to play, one final revelation that would ensure justice for all the women Crawford had harassed and discriminated against. "Before Mr. Crawford responds," Sarah said calmly, "I'd like to introduce some additional witnesses." She pressed a button on the conference phone. "Jennifer, are you there?" The speaker crackled to life, and Jennifer's voice filled the boardroom. "Yes, I'm here, and I'm not alone." One by one, women began to speak, current and former employees of the marketing department. Each had their own story of Crawford's discrimination and harassment. Some had left the company, their careers derailed. Others had stayed, enduring daily humiliation because they couldn't afford to quit. Crawford's face grew paler with each testimony. These weren't just anonymous complaints. These were detailed accounts from professional women he had systematically targeted, each one corroborating the patterns Sarah had documented. Maria described how Crawford had sabotaged her client presentations, claiming her accent was unprofessional while praising male employees with similar accents. Rebecca detailed how her career had stalled after she requested flexible hours for her child's medical appointments, while male colleagues were granted similar arrangements without question. Linda, who had left 6 months ago, described how Crawford had denied her 3 promotions, each time giving them to less qualified male employees. Her voice shook as she detailed how Crawford had told her she wasn't aggressive enough for leadership, then criticized her for being too pushy when she stood up for herself. As the testimonies continued, Sarah noticed several board members taking notes, their expressions growing increasingly grave. The legal team was documenting everything, occasionally exchanging significant looks. Then came the most damaging testimony of all. Eleanor Watson, Crawford's former assistant at his previous company, described a pattern of behavior identical to what Sarah had documented. Crawford had been quietly asked to resign from that position, but his connections had helped him secure the job at Chen Industries, where he had immediately begun repeating the same patterns. "We have Eleanor's full statement," Sarah added, along with documentation from 3 other companies where Mr. Crawford worked previously. "The pattern is consistent and spans over a decade." Crawford finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "This is a conspiracy. Martinez, or Chen, whatever her name is, she set me up. She came into my department under false pretenses." "To protect the integrity of the investigation," Sarah interrupted smoothly. "An investigation that became necessary because of multiple complaints about your behavior. Complaints that were mysteriously lost by your friends in HR." She turned to the board. "Which brings us to the next part of my presentation, the systematic suppression of harassment complaints and the individuals who helped cover up Mr. Crawford's behavior." Crawford's eyes widened as Sarah opened another file. She could see him realizing that his entire network of protection was about to be exposed. The friends who had helped him hide complaints, the colleagues who had looked the other way, the executives who had decided it was easier to transfer or terminate victims than address the real problem. All of them would be held accountable. "What do you want?" Crawford's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah paused, looking directly at him. "What do I want? I want every woman you've harassed and discriminated against to receive justice. I want every career you've damaged to be restored. I want every dollar of wages and promotions denied due to gender discrimination to be repaid with interest." She turned back to the board. and I want systematic changes to ensure this never happens again. Not in our marketing department, not in our company, not in any workplace where Chen Industries has influence." James Chen nodded approvingly as Sarah began outlining her proposed changes. New harassment reporting procedures that bypass traditional power structures, independent investigations of all complaints, mandatory training for all employees, and a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation. As she spoke, Sarah could see the future taking shape. A workplace where talent and hard work mattered more than gender, where women could advance based on merit rather than playing the game, where everyone had an equal opportunity to succeed. But first, there was the matter of Michael Crawford and his enablers. Sarah laid 3 documents on the table in front of Crawford. "You have a choice to make, Mr. Crawford." The first document was a resignation letter, complete with a non-disclosure agreement. The second was a detailed list of financial restitution to be paid to his victims. The third was a blank sheet of paper. Option 1. You resign immediately. The company will issue a neutral statement about your departure. You will personally compensate every woman whose career you damaged, as calculated by our financial team. You will never work in this industry again. Crawford stared at the first document, his hands shaking slightly. Option 2, Sarah continued. We take this public. Every recording, every email, every piece of evidence becomes part of a very public legal battle. Your behavior becomes headline news. Your previous employers are contacted. Every woman you've ever harassed gets to tell her story, not just to this board, but to the media. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Several were already on their phones, likely contacting their PR teams. And option 3? Crawford gestured to the blank paper, trying to maintain some semblance of control. Option 3 is yours to write, but I should mention that while you consider your choice, similar meetings are taking place with everyone who helped cover up your behavior. By tomorrow morning, this company's entire power structure will have changed. James Chen stepped forward. The board will take a brief recess while Mr. Crawford considers his options. Sarah, would you please share your recommendations for a departmental restructuring? As Crawford sat alone with the 3 documents, Sarah began presenting her plan for transforming the marketing department. She had already identified talented women who had been passed over for promotion. She outlined new project assignment procedures, mentoring programs, and transparent performance review systems. Jennifer's voice came through the speaker again. Ms. Chen, the other employees want you to know. We're behind you, all of us. Whatever happens next, we're ready. Sarah smiled, knowing that Crawford could hear every word. Thank you, Jennifer. Please let everyone know that changes will begin immediately. Every discriminatory policy is suspended as of now. Every retaliatory action will be reviewed. Every voice will be heard. Through the boardroom's glass walls, Sarah could see activity in the offices below. Word was spreading. Women were gathering in small groups, sharing stories, offering support. The atmosphere was changing from fear to hope. Crawford looked up from the documents, his face ashen. He had finally realized the true magnitude of his situation. This wasn't just about losing his job or his reputation. This was about fundamental change, about justice delayed but not denied, about power structures crumbling and new ones rising. How long do I have to decide? He asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah checked her watch. In the marketing department below, she could see more people arriving, women who had left the company under Crawford's leadership, returning to tell their stories. The company's legal team was setting up in conference rooms, ready to document years of systematic discrimination. The business day ends at 5, she replied calmly. By then, every person you've hurt will have had a chance to speak. Every act of discrimination will be recorded. Every cover-up will be exposed. Your time to control the narrative is running out, Mr. Crawford. She gathered her files, preparing to continue her presentation to the board. But before she left, she had one final message for the man who had made the mistake of underestimating her and every other woman in his department. One more thing, Mr. Crawford. You once told me that success in business was about understanding your natural place in the hierarchy. Sarah's voice carried across the boardroom. I agree, and today, you're finally learning yours. She turned to leave, but Crawford's desperate voice stopped her. Wait, this isn't fair. I was just doing things the way they've always been done. Everyone knows that's how business works. Sarah turned back slowly, her expression firm. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Crawford. And that's exactly what's going to change, starting today. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. While Crawford remained isolated in the boardroom, Sarah orchestrated a transformation of the company's power structure. Conference rooms throughout the building filled with women sharing their experiences. HR representatives, carefully selected by Sarah's team, documented years of discrimination and retaliation. Jennifer had organized the current marketing department employees, creating a detailed account of every discriminatory policy Crawford had implemented. Maria led a task force examining salary disparities and denied promotions. Rebecca coordinated with former employees who were returning to add their testimonies to the growing body of evidence. By 3 o'clock, the company's legal team had compiled enough documentation to fill several databases. The pattern was clear. Crawford's behavior wasn't just individual harassment. It was part of a systematic effort to maintain an old-guard power structure that benefited men at women's expense. At 4 o'clock, Sarah received a message from the board. They had unanimously approved her proposed changes, including a substantial fund for compensating victims of discrimination and a complete overhaul of the company's harassment reporting procedures. At 4:30, Crawford's lawyer arrived. Sarah watched through the glass walls as they reviewed the documents. She could see the moment Crawford realized he had no way out. His shoulders slumped, his face dropped into his hands. At 4:45, the lawyer approached Sarah with the signed resignation letter and compensation agreement. Crawford had chosen option 1, the quietest exit, but also the most expensive. He would be paying restitution to his victims for years to come. But Sarah wasn't finished. As Crawford prepared to leave the building for the last time, she had one final card to play. She opened her laptop and pulled up a familiar file, the presentation she had created weeks ago, the one Crawford had given to Todd to present. "Mr. Crawford," she called out, "before you go, I thought you might like to see how that client presentation should have been handled." The board members, who had remained to oversee Crawford's departure, turned their attention to the screen. Sarah began presenting her strategy with the confidence and expertise Crawford had tried so hard to suppress. Each slide revealed her deep understanding of the market, her innovative approaches, her clear vision for the future. As she spoke, Sarah could see the board members exchanging impressed looks. Crawford's face grew increasingly red as he realized what he had thrown away, not just in Sarah's case, but in every talented woman he had underestimated and undermined. When she finished, the board chairman stood. "Ms. Chen, the board would like to discuss another matter with you regarding the future leadership of the marketing department." Crawford watched, frozen, as Sarah smoothly transitioned from exposing his discrimination to demonstrating her executive capabilities. His entire worldview was crumbling before his eyes. "One last thing, Mr. Crawford," Sarah said as security arrived to escort him out. "Remember what you said about women being better suited to supportive positions? I thought you should know. That client you dismissed, they called after seeing my presentation. They've decided to sign with us after all, the largest contract in the company's history." As Crawford was led away, Sarah turned back to the board. She could see Jennifer and the others watching from the offices below, their faces filled with hope and determination. The old power structure was falling, and from its ruins, something better would rise. The next morning, Sarah arrived early to find the marketing department already buzzing with energy. The news of Crawford's departure had spread quickly, but more importantly, so had the news of the company's commitment to change. Where Crawford's desk had been, there was now a simple notice board. On it, Sarah had posted the new department policies, transparent promotion criteria, equal pay structures, flexible working arrangements for all employees, and clear procedures for reporting any form of discrimination or harassment. "Ms. Chen," Jennifer approached with a stack of papers, "we've received 67 applications since last night, all from women who left the company under Crawford's leadership. They want to come back." Sarah smiled. "Schedule interviews with all of them. And Jennifer, I think it's time you took that promotion Crawford denied you 3 times. How does Deputy Director of Marketing sound?" Jennifer's eyes widened. "Are you serious? Your first task will be helping me rebuild this department. We have a lot of talented people to bring back, and a lot of wrongs to right." Throughout the day, Sarah met with department heads across the company. Each meeting followed a similar pattern, initial defensiveness giving way to understanding as she shared carefully selected portions of her evidence. By lunch, 4 other executives had resigned, choosing quiet departures over public exposure of their roles in perpetuating discrimination. In the afternoon, Sarah led her first official meeting as marketing director. The conference room was packed, with some people joining virtually, former employees eager to be part of the transformation. Crawford believed success in business was about maintaining hierarchies, Sarah began. He was wrong. Success comes from recognizing and nurturing talent, from creating an environment where everyone can contribute their best work. That's what we're going to build here. She outlined her vision for the department: collaborative project teams, mentoring programs, clear paths for advancement based on merit rather than gender. The energy in the room was palpable as people began sharing ideas, their voices no longer silenced by fear of retaliation. Maria presented her analysis of salary disparities, which would guide the company's new equal pay initiative. Rebecca introduced a comprehensive flexible working policy that would help parents balance career and family responsibilities. Linda, who had returned as soon as she heard about Crawford's departure, proposed a new training program to help women develop leadership skills. As the meeting concluded, Sarah's father appeared in the doorway. He listened as the last few ideas were shared, noting how people now spoke freely without the constant fear that had characterized Crawford's leadership. "You've started something remarkable here," he said as the room cleared. "But you know it won't be easy. There will be resistance to change, even backlash." Sarah nodded. "I know. That's why we're not stopping with our company. Crawford's behavior was part of a larger problem in the industry. We're going to address that too." She showed him her next project, a comprehensive program to identify and combat workplace discrimination, which Chen Industries would share with other companies. It included training materials, reporting procedures, and support systems for victims of harassment. "Crawford thought he was teaching me how business works," Sarah said. "Instead, he showed me exactly what needs to change. And now, we have the evidence and the platform to make that change happen." As evening fell, Sarah walked through the marketing department one last time before heading home. The atmosphere had already shifted. There was laughter, collaborative discussion, a sense of possibility that had been missing under Crawford's leadership. On her desk, she found a card signed by the entire department. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for showing us that speaking up matters, that change is possible, and that talent will always overcome prejudice." Sarah smiled, thinking about Crawford's words at the holiday party. He had been right about one thing: success in business was about understanding your place. But he had been wrong about what that meant. 1 year later, Sarah stood at a podium in the company's largest conference hall, addressing a room full of business leaders from across the industry. Behind her, a screen displayed the results of Chen Industries' transformation. Employee retention had increased by 78%. Innovation metrics had shattered previous records. The marketing department, now led by a diverse team of talented professionals, had doubled its client base. Most importantly, the company had become known as a pioneer in workplace equality. "A year ago," Sarah began, "I sat in a conference room, listening to a man explain why women weren't suited for leadership roles in business. Today, I'm here to share the results of proving him wrong." The audience included many familiar faces. Jennifer, now successfully leading major client relationships. Maria, whose accent had become an asset in expanding into new markets. Rebecca, whose flexible working policy had been adopted by companies nationwide. Linda, whose leadership training program had launched dozens of successful careers. "But this isn't just about one company's transformation," Sarah continued. "It's about changing an entire business culture. The program we're launching today will help other companies identify and eliminate discrimination, create inclusive workplaces, and tap into the full potential of all their employees." In the front row, Sarah's father beamed with pride. The company he had built was becoming something even greater, a catalyst for industry-wide change. As Sarah concluded her speech, she shared one final piece of news. Chen Industries was establishing a foundation to support women who had left careers due to discrimination, providing resources for them to rebuild their professional lives. "The first recipient of our Career Restoration Grant," she announced, "is Eleanor Watson, the woman whose testimony helped expose a decade-long pattern of discrimination. She's now completing her executive MBA and will be joining our board of directors next month." The applause was thunderous, but the most satisfying sound to Sarah's ears was the quiet ping of her phone. A news alert reported that Crawford's former company had just settled a massive discrimination lawsuit. His past was finally catching up with him, and his carefully constructed network of protection was unraveling across the industry. After the presentation, Sarah returned to the marketing department. The space had been redesigned, replacing hierarchical corner offices with collaborative workspaces. The wall that had once displayed Crawford's awards now showcased the achievements of team members at all levels. "Ms. Chen," Jennifer approached with a smile, "you'll never guess who called. Remember that client Crawford said wouldn't respect female presenters? They want to expand their contract. Specifically requested our team because of our innovative and inclusive approach." Sarah laughed. "Send the contract to Crawford. I hear he's looking for work these days. Let him see what he missed by underestimating us." That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave, she paused by the department entrance. The simple notice board had evolved into a wall of success stories. Promotions earned through merit, projects led by emerging talents, barriers broken by determination. She thought about Crawford's words about natural hierarchies and playing the game. He had been wrong about business, wrong about leadership, wrong about women. But his greatest mistake had been underestimating the power of those he sought to diminish. "Ready for dinner, Dad?" Sarah asked as her father joined her. "I want to tell you about my next project. I think it's time we looked at expanding our international offices. There are a lot of talented people out there waiting for their chance to shine." As they walked out together, Sarah glanced back at the transformed space she had helped create. Crawford had taught her an invaluable lesson, though not the one he intended. He had shown her that real change doesn't come from playing by the old rules. It comes from having the courage to write new ones. The message was clear. In the modern business world, success isn't about maintaining hierarchies or playing games. It's about creating environments where talent can flourish, regardless of gender. And sometimes, the quiet analyst in the corner office might just turn out to be the catalyst for transformation that changes everything.